She knocked for work at midnight. The widowed rancher opened the door holding his crying baby. Holloway Ranch, Wyoming Territory, January 1008. 169. The wind screamed across the open plains like a wounded animal, hurling snow against the cracked windows of the Holloway Ranch house. It was nearing midnight, and the moon hung low behind a curtain of gray clouds. Inside, the fire in the hearth was dim, casting long shadows on the wooden floorboards. Rhett Holloway stood near the mantel, bouncing his 8-month-old daughter against his shoulder. Her cries had grown hoarser, frantic, just like every night since her mother passed. He was about to rock her toward sleep again when a sound broke through the wind. 3 sharp knocks, hesitant but firm. He frowned. Another knock. With the baby in one arm, he reached for the pistol resting by the door frame and pulled it free, cocking the hammer back as he opened the door with the other hand. There, framed in the howling dark, stood a woman. Her hair was winded and tangled beneath a worn shawl. Her dress was torn at the hem, soaked and stiff with snow. She was shaking, but not from fear, more like from pure exhaustion. Rhett narrowed his eyes. The baby screamed louder. The woman's voice was raspy, barely above a whisper. "I can work," she said. "I don't want charity." Rhett glanced behind her. No wagon, no horse, just a single canvas sack clutched in her fingers. Her cheeks were ghost pale against the night. He didn't move. "Too many folks come knocking with mouths full of lies," he said flatly. "I got a baby to protect, not a heart to fix." The woman's mouth tightened. She nodded once slow. Then she turned and began walking into the wind, her steps uneven in the snow. Her boots, if they could still be called that, left dragging marks behind. She made it as far as the wooden fence at the edge of the yard before her knees buckled. She sank into the snow like a sack of wheat, curled inward, and didn't get up. Rhett shut the door. The baby kept crying. He paced the floor with her, tried humming the tune his wife used to sing, but it came out hollow. His grip tightened on the back of a kitchen chair as he stared at the flickering firelight. Then he heard her voice again, not in the wind, but in memory. His wife, her hand on his chest the night before she passed, whispering, "Don't become stone when someone else might need warmth." Rhett muttered a curse under his breath. He grabbed his coat from the hook and yanked the door open. She was still lying there, half buried now. Her fingers were blue around the sack. He stomped through the snow and bent down. "Damn fool," he muttered and scooped her up in his free arm. She didn't stir, just a soft breath against his collarbone so light it made him pause. Inside, he laid the baby in her crib, then brought the woman to the fireside and set her gently on the old leather couch. The room smelled like pine smoke and cold cotton. She was too light. Her boots were wet through and torn. He knelt beside her and tugged them off carefully. Her socks were crusted with ice. He didn't speak, just set her boots near the hearth, and after a moment pulled a dry wool blanket over her. Then, almost reluctantly, he reached for one of his wife's shawls from the peg on the wall and draped it over the woman's shoulders. Her lips moved in her sleep. No words, just a sound like someone trying to remember how to breathe. Rhett stood, exhaled slowly, and backed away. He didn't trust her. He didn't trust anyone. But as he looked at the fire casting warmth across her face, something in his chest shifted, just a crack, enough to let the night air feel less like stone. And outside the storm raged on, but the wind could no longer reach her. The morning crept in soft and gray, light sneaking through the frosted windows of the Holloway Ranch house. The fire had died down to warm embers, but the air still held a hush of sleep, of something paused between yesterday and what might come next. Will Dorn stirred first, her limbs etched from cold and unfamiliar rest, but the weight in her arms held her still. She blinked slowly, focusing on the bundle cradled to her chest. The baby girl, peaceful now, her tiny fist curled against Willa's coat. A little flutter of breath fogged against the cloth. Willa stared, stunned. Somehow, the baby had settled in her arms overnight. She shifted her eyes to the floor. There, leaning against the wall, was Rhett Holloway. His long legs were stretched out before him, arms crossed over his chest, head slumped down, hat pulled low. A rifle rested beside his shoulder, just within reach. He had slept there. Between her and the door, Willa sat up slowly, careful not to disturb the child. Her shoulder etched where it had pressed into the arm of the couch. She adjusted the baby gently, laying her in the crib with surprising reluctance, then stood and took stock of the room. No one had said she could stay, so she didn't wait to be told. She washed the tin cups in the basin quietly, found the baby's bottle, warmed some milk from the pot left on the stove. By the time Rhett stirred and pushed his hat back, she was sweeping the floor. He said nothing, just watched her. She didn't look at him. Later, she stepped outside, cringing at the cold, biting her feet through thin, torn boots. The snow had crusted hard and sharp. She moved stiffly across the yard toward the coop, checking on the hens, gathering what little they'd laid. She cleared some of the mess, checked the feed. No one told her what needed doing. She just did what she could. That evening, after she'd rinsed her hands in cold water and dried them with the hem of her skirt, she stepped onto the porch and found a pair of boots waiting. They were not new, but they were clean, restitched at the heel, the soles reinforced. Inside, the lining was soft, packed with dried, sweet grass. They smelled faintly of rosemary and warmth. She didn't have to ask. Rhett sat by the doorway, whittling something in his lap. He didn't glance up as she stepped closer, didn't say a word, but Willa caught the way his fingers stilled just for a beat as she knelt to try them on. They fit. The next morning, she walked easier, days folded over like pages, each one quiet but not cold. Rhett worked in the barn. Willa cooked and cleaned. The baby clung to her now, babbling and reaching for her hands, tugging Willa's sleeve with growing strength. She crawled faster each day, her giggles becoming part of the house's rhythm. Then one afternoon, as the wind settled, and the sun leaned warm across the porch, Willa knelt beside the goat pen, milking into a tin pail. Her hair was tied back with a scrap of blue cloth, her fingers red from the chill. She did not hear Red approach until his boots crunched the straw behind her. She looked up. He held something in his hand, a square of cloth, pale ivory, with tiny wild flowers stitched into the corners in faded thread. The embroidery was delicate, done with a loving hand. Time had softened the colors, but not the meaning. He extended it silently. She took it. "My wife sewed this for our girl," he said, voice low, rougher than usual. "And never got to use it." Wells' fingers closed over the cloth, thumb brushing one small flower stitched in blue. She didn't say thank you. She didn't need to. The silence between them had shifted, not softened, but steadied, as if something fragile had found footing. That night, as she tucked the baby in, the cloth lay beneath the child's head like a prayer not spoken aloud, and when Willa sat by the fire, later, hands folded in her lap, Rhett walked past and paused just long enough to let his fingertips brush the edge of her chair. Neither spoke, but the quiet was no longer empty. Nights did not come easy. Willa lay stiff on the narrow bed in the spare room, breath shallow, ears straining against the quiet. But it wasn't noise that haunted her. It was silence, the kind that let old memories creep in through the cracks. In her dreams, the man always came back. He wore the same worn coat, the same smirk. His hands were red, sometimes with her blood, sometimes her sister's. She could never scream, never run fast enough. The door always locked behind her. In the dream, she was trapped, and he always laughed. That night, like too many before, she cried in her sleep, not loudly, just enough for Rhett to hear. As he passed her door, he paused. Through the thin wood, he heard the restless shift of blankets, a muffled sob. but he didn't open the door, didn't call her name. He just stood there for a long while, jaw clenched. In the morning, when Willow woke, sweat cooling on her back, the dream fading like smoke, there was a tin cup of warm water with honey beside her pillow. No note, no knock, just care, placed gently. May was already awake, cooing in her crib. When Willa lifted her, the little girl squealed, arms reaching. She pressed her cheek to Willa's neck like she'd known her always. From then on, the child became her shadow. She followed Willa around the kitchen, crawled behind her into the barn, and cried if someone else tried to hold her. When Willa spoke, May listened. When Willa sang, the baby quieted, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, like remembering something from before she was born. It was a late afternoon when May stumbled over a wooden step outside the porch. She wasn't walking steady yet, just managing a few steps between strong furniture, but she had wriggled away from Rhett's arms, toddled out after Willa, and tripped. The baby cried out. Willa dropped the water bucket in her hands and rushed forward, scooping May up before Rhett could reach them. SHH. She whispered, heart pounding, "You're all right, sweet pea. Just scared, aren't you?" She sat on the porch floor with May in her lap and began to hum and soft. A lullaby passed down from her mother's side of the family, something about riverstones and safe homes. From the barn doorway, Rhett stood frozen, his hands curled into fists, not in anger, but because something inside him twisted at the sound. Her voice, the way she held his child, the ache in his chest. He didn't move until the last note fell into silence. That evening, Willa couldn't find Rhett in the house. She wandered out back past the hen house and the frost-laced fence until she saw him on the hill above her. The pasture, he stood by a small wooden cross. It was plain hand-carved, barely holding together in the wind. Beside it lay a tiny braid of golden hair May's tied with a pink ribbon, one of the few his wife had sewn before she died. Willa stayed back, unsure if she should approach, but Rhett spoke without turning. "I keep waiting for her to come back, but she ain't." He took a breath, slow and rough. "And this house, it needs breath again." Willa didn't answer. The wind moved between them, quiet and understanding. She looked at the braid, the ribbon, at the man who had stood so stone cold that first night and now stood softer like someone trying to remember how to feel. He didn't ask anything of her. Not forgiveness, not pity, not even trust. Just to stay and maybe, just maybe, breathe life into a house that had forgotten how. She stepped forward and knelt beside the grave, brushing her fingers lightly across the ribbon. Nothing was spoken, but something shifted. Not in the wind. Not in the earth, in him and in her. The wind had teeth that week. It sliced down from the mountains and bit into skin and timber alike. In town, doors slammed harder, tongues did too. They say he took her in, just the two of them, and that baby, a widower or living with a stray. That ain't grief, that's something else. She's not even kin. Willa heard it outside the dry goods store, heard her name spoken with syrup and spite. She didn't flinch, just turned away and walked the long trail back to the Holloway ranch, hands buried deep in her skirt. That night, she packed quietly, one small satchel, no note of complaint, no plea for anything owed. She folded the baby's spare blanket and kissed May's forehead while she slept. Then, with trembling fingers, Willa slipped off the boots Rhett had left her weeks ago, boots once belonging to his wife, and placed them neatly on the porch step. On the inside of one, she tucked a folded scrap of paper. "Thank you for warmth, for stillness, for letting me remember who I was before I ran." By the time dawn broke, Willa was gone. Rhett didn't notice right away. He rose, made coffee, reached for the wood pile, and saw the boots. His eye narrowed, then he saw the paper. His jaw clenched, but he didn't read it. Not yet. Inside, May began to cry. He tried to feed her. She refused, tried to rock her. She screamed. She turned her head toward the door as if she already knew Willa wouldn't be back. That day, the crying didn't stop, nor the next hour, nor the one after. By dusk, Rhett was pacing. By midnight, he had saddled the mare. The trail was icy and cruel, wind pushing snow sideways, but he knew where to look. She wouldn't have gone far, not with only a shawl and sore feet. He passed the edge of town, then the dead grove, until there a flicker of smoke rose from the chimney of an old storage cabin near the ridge. He dismounted, boots crunching through crusted snow. Willa sat inside, curled near the fire with her hand wrapped around her knees. Her eyes met his red, weary, tired. He didn't speak right away. She looked away. I didn't want to bring trouble. You didn't. The boots were yours, hers. I shouldn't. I left them for you. Silence sat between them for a long breath. Then Rhett stepped forward and pulled something from his coat pocket. A small, clean cloth, pale blue, edged with clumsy white stitching in a woman's hand. He offered it. My wife sewed this for our girl, never got to use it. Willis stared at it, throat tight. You think I let you in 'cause I needed help? Rhett asked softly. I let you in 'cause this place got warm when you breathed. Her lip trembled, but no tears came. She reached for the cloth, held it to her chest, and finally nodded just once. They left footprints in the snow as they walked back. 2 sets, but only one belonged to someone who no longer planned to keep walking. The wind howled through Holloway Ranch like a wounded beast. Snow slammed sideways against the windows, rattling every pane. The fire spat low embers, and even the baby stirred uneasily in her sleep. Rhett stood by the front door, oil lantern swinging in his grip, jaw tight as he stared into the night. Willow watched from the hearth, arms wrapped tight around herself. Then the sound came, a loud crack followed by the groan of wood splitting under pressure. Rhett swore, roofs given out on the barn. Before Willa could respond, he was already shrugging into his coat. I'm coming with you, she said, grabbing her shawl. No, you stay, he snapped. I mean it, Willa, I got this. The door slammed behind him. She stood frozen for only a moment. Then the baby whimpered behind her as if echoing the panic she tried to suppress. Another wind howled. She tightened her shawl and stepped into the storm. Outside, the world was white and screaming. Willa trudged through snowdrifts taller than her knees, shielding her face with one arm. She reached the barn just in time to see Rhett lifting a fence post to brace the buckling roof. The animals were panicked, their low cries muffled by the roar of the wind. She didn't call his name, didn't wait for permission. Her eyes scanned the chaos until she saw it. A calf trapped beneath a fallen beam, kicking weakly. Willa darted forward. Get out of here. Rhett barked when he saw her. It's not safe. But she was already on her knees, tugging straw and debris aside. The calf let out a feeble bleat. A second beam shifted overhead. Willa. Damn it! She crawled deeper, fingers gripping the calf's slick body. The wood above groaned. A rusted iron brace gave way with a sharp pop. She heard it before she felt it. A searing pain tore across her hand. The red-hot metal had landed on her skin, branding her through the glove. She gasped, but didn't cry out. Instead, she wrapped her good arm around the calf's neck and whispered softly, They don't understand. Stay when they're freezing. Rhett was there a second later, hauling the beam away, scooping her and the calf both into his arms with a strength that barely seemed human. They staggered through the snow back to the house. His breath was ragged. Hers was shallow. Inside, he kicked the door shut with his boot and laid her down near the fire. The calf was already stirring weakly in the corner. Willa hissed in pain, cradling her burned hand. Rhett knelt beside her, breathing hard. He didn't speak. He moved fast, pulling the first aid tin from the shelf, fetching a bowl of cold water. He dipped a cloth and pressed it gently to her palm. She flinched. Easy, he murmured, voice suddenly low again, gentle. It's bad, but not deep. He tore a strip from his old flannel shirt, still warm from his body, wrapped it carefully around her hand. His fingers were steady, but his brow was furrowed, mouth tight. When it was done, he didn't pull away. He just sat there, staring at her burned skin wrapped in plaid. I was wrong. He said almost inaudibly, You're not the wind in this house. You're the walls. Willa turned her face from him, blinking fast at the fire. But then, without looking, she reached out her good hand and placed it gently over his, not for balance, not to hand him something, not because of the child, but because it was his hand, and she had chosen to hold it. Neither of them moved. The storm outside howled on, but inside the Holloway house, something else settled, not silence, but peace. The first whispers came with the wagons, traders from the south, bringing more than just salt and seed. They came wrapped in dust and stories shared in low voices, between sacks of grain and rifle cartridges. By the time the second snow thawed, the rumors had slithered north like smoke through chimney cracks, curling around porch beams and under kitchen doors. "She's the one," a woman muttered at the general store, voice low but sharp. "The one that ran, killed her husband," they said, or tried to. Men grunted, others shook their heads, but the words stuck. Rhett heard the talk. He always did. He was a man who noticed more than he said, and though he didn't answer, the set of his jaw grew tighter, the shadows under his eyes deeper. Willa noticed change first in the way folks handed her coins, palms never touching, fingers curled back like she might burn them. At the well, conversation stopped when she drew near. A child was called away from her side too quickly, too loudly. Then came the stranger. He rode up on a tall, mean-eyed horse, wearing a brown duster and boots with silver spurs that rang against the Holloway porch like judgment. He didn't tie his rez or tip his hat, just walked right up to Rhett, who was repairing a fence post, and stopped inches away. "You letting a killer raise your baby?" the man asked, his voice carrying over the fields. Willa was near by hanging linens. May toddled through the tall grass beside her, laughing at a butterfly. At the sound of the words, Willa froze. Her hands, still damp from the washwater, clenched the cloth until her knuckles turned white. She didn't deny it. She didn't explain. She didn't run. She just bent down, lifted May into her arms, and carried the girl inside with a stillness so deep it hurt to look at. That night, the cabin felt different. The fire burned low, casting long shadows. Willa didn't eat. Rhett didn't push. May slept between them, her tiny body curled like a question neither of them had the answer to. When the clock struck midnight, Willa rose barefoot. She stepped across the cool floorboards and stood before the old mirror near the hearth. Her reflection looked back, face pale, drawn, lips tight. She touched the glass lightly, fingertips trembling. Then she whispered, "I did run. I didn't kill him, but I might have. If God hadn't sent that horse by Rhett sat on the other side of the wall, silent. He heard every word. Willa didn't know. She stared at the mirror again. Her voice cracked this time. He hit my sister again. I told him to stop," he laughed. "So I pushed just one step. He fell, broke his leg, got fever, died a week later." She closed her eyes. All they saw was a girl too small to fight. So I must have planned it. I didn't, but I didn't cry either. A floorboard creaked. Will turned. Rhett stood there in the doorway holding something in his hand. He didn't speak right away, just walked toward her and placed a small wooden cross on the table beside her. It was old, edges smooth, the grain faded with time. She believed broken ain't the same as bad. He said quietly, "So do I." Their eyes met in the mirror. Willa's shoulders shook, not from fear, not from shame, but because someone finally had placed a piece of their past beside hers and left it there, without judgment, and for the first time, the woman in the mirror looked like someone worth saving. The snow had been falling since dusk, thick, slow flakes that blanketed the land in a suffocating hush. Every noise felt muffled, every breath heavier. At the Holloway ranch, dinner sat untouched. May fussed in her high chair, cheeks red from heat and teething, her small fists banging against the tray. Willa moved in quiet loops across the floor, cradling the baby to her chest, her own eyes rimmed with worry. Rhett stood at the window, staring into the storm, arms crossed, his jaw set tight. Then came the knock, not the kind meant to ask. It was a demand, sharp and raw. Rhett pulled the door open. "Tommy's missing," said the man on the porch, eyes wide with fear. He was playing near Woods. Ain't no one seen him since noon. For a beat, the wind howled louder than anyone could speak. Willa didn't wait. She passed May gently to Rhett, snatched the oil lantern from the hook by the stove, and was halfway into her coat before he could react. "I'll go toward the creek," she said, voice steady, eyes already scanning the storm. "That ain't your job," Rhett called after her, the weight of the baby in his arms suddenly terrifying. But Willa didn't turn. She fastened her buttons, pulled the scarf over her mouth, and vanished into the white. The woods were cruel in winter. Bitter wind stabbed at her skin through wool. Snow clung to her boots, made every step a test. She fell once, scraped her palms on frozen brush, but got up and pressed on, calling out again and again. "Tommy, Tommy," the only answer was the wind. Her voice grew, hands numb, around the lantern handle. Then, through a veil of snow, she saw it. An old shack scorched black at one end, leaning tiredly among the trees. A shadow inside flickered. Willa bolted forward, heart hammering, the hunting shack half burned years ago in a lightning fire. The roof barely held. She crept in slow flame from the lantern, lighting a curve of wall, a scorched beam, and a small figure huddled in the corner, Tommy shaking, tear streaks smudged with soot. "Hey," she breathed, lowering herself to the ground. "You're all right now, sweetheart. I've got you." She wrapped him in her coat, lifting his small body close. The moment her arms closed around him, the boy clung like a vine, face buried in her shoulder. Above, the wood moaned. A sharp crack rang out. No time. She turned and ran, boots sliding, snow battering her face. They exploded out the door just as the roof collapsed, flames spitting behind them, smoke chased by snow. She dropped to her knees, wrapped herself around the boy, gasping for breath. Her body shook, the old burn on her arm, screaming where the coat had torn. Hair stuck to her face, damp with sweat and ash. That's how Rhett found her. Following the tracks of someone who didn't wait to be asked, he rode hard until the light from her lantern pierced the dark. And there she was, kneeling in the snow. Boy cradled tight, a figure of ash and fire, and something unbreakable. He dismounted before the horse stopped moving, dropping to his knees beside her. "Willa," he murmured, his hands hesitant. Reverent, she looked up, eyes red, jaw clenched. "He's okay." Behind them, other lanterns appeared, villagers arriving in ones and twos, faces pale, voices quiet. One woman stepped forward and took Tommy from her arms. Another wrapped a blanket around her shaking shoulders. No judgment, no questions, just the soft press of gratitude. And then Rhett stood. Snow clung to his coat, melted in his beard. He turned to face the gathering crowd, still on one knee, his voice clear. "I didn't marry her, but I gave her my roof, my child, my trust. That's more than most vows." The wind stilled. No one spoke. Then, far off, a sound broke the silence. The old church bell, frozen and forgotten, rang once into the night. Not for a wedding, not for mourning, but for a home that chose to keep burning. There was no wedding gown, no veil, no lace, no whispered, "I do." But on a wind-brushed morning in spring, Willa stood in the yard of the Hall Ranch, her arms wrapped around a giggling May, now toddling with sure feet, cheeks flushed with health. Beside her stood Rhett, his once dark hair peppered with gray, his palms rough with dirt from planting fence posts that week. He did not wear a suit. He never had just the old coat that still carried the scent of wood smoke and home. The ranch house had changed. The door, once bolted tight, now swung easily on its hinges. Inside, the fire always burned, the kettle always warm. It no longer held silence like a wound. It held voices, voices of children, some loud, some shy. Women once whispered about now with sleeves rolled up, chopping vegetables, brushing hair, bandaging scraped knees. The Holloway Ranch had become a place for those with nowhere else to go, and no one was ever asked where they came from, only if they wanted to stay. Willa taught them all. She stitched names into scraps of linen for the little ones, taught them how to write those names themselves slowly like they mattered. She showed the girls how to patch clothes, how to thread a needle, how to carry a child with one arm and still sweep with the other. Rhett taught the boys to ride bareback, how to stack kindling that would catch flame in the worst wind, how to read a trail from one bent leaf. He rarely praised, but when he placed a hand on a shoulder or nodded once from the porch, they stood taller, and they all called her Miss Willa. Not the woman who came late one night, not the girl with no past, just Willa. One afternoon, a visitor from the next county came by, a young man with ink-stained fingers and curious eyes. He'd heard of ranch, of how it had become a place of peace after so much loss. Over coffee, he asked Rhett almost casually, why her? Rhett didn't answer right away. He looked out the window. Willa stood by the well, her hair braided back. May tugged at her apron, asking to be picked up. Willa laughed, crouched down, and helped the girl wrap a scarf around her neck, soft and gentle. Rhett's eyes softened, because she knocked. He said simply, and I opened, and the wind stopped blowing since. That evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and painted the snow golden, a child stepped out onto the yard. May, now nearly 2, walked steady in tiny boots, a cloth book clutched in her hand. On the front, sewn carefully in red thread, was the name Holloway. Willa stood by the hearth, stirring stew, listening to the familiar hum of life filling every room. She didn't glance back when Rhett came in and set his hand on the small of her back. She just leaned into it, steady and sure. Not a guest anymore, not a question mark. She had become what the house needed most. Its center, its breath, its name. If Willa and Rhett's story stirred something in your heart, don't forget to hit that hype button to support more tales of love and resilience in the wild. And if you want to keep riding with us through stories of heartbreak, hope, and healing under the western skies, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories out here. There's always a story waiting for someone just like you.